everyone, and welcome to our virtual field trip today. My name is Jacqueline Drakis, and I'm the Expeditions Manager for Earth Echo International. Earth Echo International is a global nonprofit founded on the belief that youth have the power to change our planet. Reaching more than 2 million people in 146 countries, we provide original content, immersive experiences, and trusted resources to empower young people to become leaders and problem solvers in their communities and around the world. Now let's get started with today's virtual field trip. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that you can ask questions throughout the event today. So if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and type your questions into the chat. And if you're watching this through Zoom, please use the Q&A app. We have set aside time throughout the presentation to answer those questions. Please help me in welcoming our two special guests for today. We have Dave Langlois and Jim Trogdon. Dave is a hydroponics specialist at CropKing LLC. Dave's work is incorporating education systems into classrooms and greenhouses, as well as assisting teachers in designing and building hydroponic laboratories for STEM and agriculture education. Jim Trogdon has over 25 years of experience teaching middle school science. Jim has found experiential learning to be the most successful educational environment. His students at Coventry Middle School in Akron, Ohio, work collaboratively with Cuyahoga Valley National Park, Ohio State University's Stone Lab, and the Wilds in Cumberland, Ohio. Jim is also an Earth Echo Expeditions Fellow. So first we'll hear from Dave. So go ahead and take it away, Dave.
All right, hopefully you can hear me okay. As Jacqueline said, I'm Dave from CropKing. So we want to talk a little bit about who CropKing is first. So we are a family-owned business that manufactures hydroponics equipment and greenhouses. We've been doing this for a little over 35 years, and we're based in Lodi, Ohio, which is south of Cleveland. We have 30 employees, most of which live in Ohio, but we have a few that live in Colorado, Iowa, and Pennsylvania. So the systems that the greenhouses that we produce are kind of the full gamut. We do everything from very high-tech greenhouses like you're going to see today on our tour to very low-tech greenhouses like high tunnels and cold frame hoop houses. So we kind of do a little bit of everything, but what we really specialize in is two different types of hydroponics. The first is what's called NFT production. And we do this for very large greenhouses, as you can see in the picture here. But also we do some small hobby systems that are great for classrooms. And in fact, we have the smallest of our system can fit right on a desktop, which is pretty cool. The other type of growing that we specialize in is what's called Dutch bucket growing. And these also for very, very large greenhouses and for small classrooms. And we can grow tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers, and we'll talk a little bit more about how those systems work. So aside from those two types of hydroponic equipment, we also sell the different types of equipment that go along with it. So with that, why don't we jump on into the greenhouse, check it out. Okay, so this is just an aerial view coming into our facility. Their manufacturing is across the street, and then we're growing inside the greenhouses, as you can see. And we do it very special. We do it without any soil at all. We call this hydroponic growing. The hydroponics is a Greek word, two Greek words. Hydro meaning water, and ponics meaning to work with. So it literally means to work with water. And inside of our greenhouses, we grow all of the fruits and vegetables in a style of growing called controlled environment agriculture. And by this, we control the entire environment that the plants are in. So we control the temperature, the humidity, and even light, so that we can get the highest production of plants possible in the smallest amount of space with the least amount of water and the least amount of fertilizer and energy inputs into the plants. And we can grow just an abundant amount of produce very locally, very fresh, very nutritious. So let's go on inside and see how it's done. So when we walk in, the first thing we're going to notice is what we call the head house. And this is kind of creates an airlock that helps keep bugs from coming in. So we're going to walk on a bath that's going to kill the bugs. And as we can see on the walls here, there's all sorts of different controls. And these controls help us control our water flow, our temperature, and our nutrients. So this is a really important part. It's kind of like the brains of the greenhouse. And then, all right, and then let's go on inside. Oop, all right, there we go. So let's go on inside and check out the inside of this greenhouse. Here we are. Now the style of growing that we have here is what's called NFT growing. And that's just a fancy word for nutrient film technique. And basically we just grow in gutters. There's a 500-gallon reservoir underground that pumps the water up to the top of the trays or the channels. And then the water runs through the bottom of these channels and then back down into the reservoir to be pumped up again. And it just completely recycles, constantly recycles. And as it does, we're just going to add in a little bit of nutrients at a time for whatever the plants are going to take up. So inside this greenhouse, we have mainly lettuces that we're growing, but we can also grow herbs. We don't harvest the entire greenhouse at one time. We'll harvest just a section of it. And we'll do about 25 trays or so. Each one of those trays has 25 sites or 25 different plants on there. So that will equate to be about 390 plants that we'll harvest at a time. And so that's a lot of lettuce. We can grow the equivalent of 4 football fields of lettuce outside in a 1,200 square foot space in the greenhouse, which is pretty cool. So that's our NFT system. And we start the plants here in a nursery system that's attached to the regular growing system. All the seeds are started in this rock wool fiber, which is basically rock that's been heated up and expanded into kind of like a cotton candy material. And the seeds are seeded directly into there. Once those seeds start sprouting and get a little bit bigger, we put them into the channels, and those channels are very close together. And the plants will grow in there for the first couple weeks. And then we'll move the channels over to a wider spacing area. So we move the whole channel over and give the plants a little bit more elbow room to grow out into fully developed plants. So in about 30 days from seed to harvest, we can grow out a head of lettuce. That's pretty quick.
So Dave, while we're waiting to take our tour in the rest of the greenhouse there,
Yeah.
I had a question. What temperature do you keep the greenhouse at?
Oh, that's a really good question. So the lettuce side of our greenhouse, the NFT side that you saw, we want to keep the temperature around 65 to 75 degrees. So we like to keep it fairly cool, and that will stay that temperature year round. In the next greenhouse that we're going to look at with our tomatoes, they like it a little bit warmer, 75 to 80 degrees.
And a question coming in from YouTube, Jared would like to know, what's the temperature of the water?
Oh, that's a good question. So the secret with hydroponics is having oxygen in that water. And the higher the temperature, then the less oxygen that water can hang on to. So we want to keep that water nice and cool. So we try to keep it in the 70s if we can, or the 60s, mid 60s if we can. That way, it holds on to all the oxygen. So when the roots are exposed to that water, they're also getting lots of oxygen and they're not going to rot in the trays. So that's an excellent question.
Great, thank you so much. And we'll have some time for some more questions, but for now, let's continue with our tour.
All right. Okay, so The next side of the greenhouse is what's called our bucket system, or Beto buckets, or they're sometimes called Dutch buckets. And this is for our larger plants, our tomatoes on the left, and you'll have cucumbers on the right, and behind them we have some peppers. And this system works very similar to the NFT system, but instead of running water constantly, we're just going to be dripping water and feeding the plants exactly what they need when they need it, and then the water goes to waste. We don't recycle this water. And the reason why we do that is because we can keep these plants alive for many, many years, up to 2 years. And if we were to recycle the water and there was to be some bugs or pathogens in that water, that could kill the plants, and we don't want that to happen. So basically, the plants grow in these buckets. There'll be 2 plants per bucket, and they can be up to 40 to 50 feet long by the time they're done growing. On the right, you're going to notice some orange flowers. Those orange flowers are special. Those are nasturtium, which is grown as a garnish for fancy restaurants. But for us, it helps us feed our hardest workers, which is our bumblebees. And these bees will fly around our greenhouse, and they're going to pollinate the tomatoes and the peppers so that we get a higher yield in our plants, so that they're very, very productive. We can harvest up to 50 pounds off of each one of these plants. Now, we don't want to be caught with our plants down, so we trellis them, and we keep them up on these strings here. And the strings help keep the plant able for up and high so that we can harvest and prune them as we go.
That's great. So we did have a question coming from Jackson. I want to say hi and shout out to Jackson. He's one of our Youth Leadership Council members here at Earth Echo. And Jackson would like to know, what does CropKing do with the vegetables when they are done growing? Could he buy some at a store or market?
Oh, that's a good question, Jackson. Yes, we sell our fruits and vegetables to local grocery stores in the Lodi area. And restaurants, and then we also do give away some to the needy, so the different food banks and such that need fresh fruits and vegetables as well.
That's fabulous. And we have a question coming from Katie on YouTube, and she wanted to know, do you have any recommendations for trying to do some hydroponics at home?
Yeah, Katie, hydroponics can be done really easy at home. You can search online for DIY hydroponic systems, and you can build them as simple as a pop bottle that we call a wicking system. You can Google the plans on that, where you take an old 2-liter pop bottle and make a system that you can grow a head of lettuce on. Or you can get a Rubbermaid container, like a tote, and fill that with water, and also grow plants in something like that as well. Very easy at home for under $5 with just a tote and a fish pump aerator. It's very successful. So you can grow basil and lettuce and all sorts of stuff.
That's great. I love that. I know a lot of us are doing some home growing and gardening nowadays. So I think hydroponics would be a great way to, expand that a little bit. So
absolutely. Yep.
Trisha would like to know, what tomato variety are you growing? And also, she said, also the rootstock.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. So the seeds are started in our greenhouse. So for some commercial growers, they'll have like a grafting with a rootstock in the ground, and that's to help protect the plants from any kind of pathogens in the soil. With hydroponics, that's not as much of a concern. So we can actually grow our transplants out in the greenhouse, or we can many commercial growers will buy their transplants. And then as far as the variety goes, we have different varieties, and they're often varieties that do well in greenhouses specifically, where there's a lot of diffused light and heat. So you can grow the regular cultivars that you could find in your garden store well in hydroponics, but you can increase your production by having different varieties that are specialized to greenhouses. And so that's generally the type of varieties that we'll try out.
Fabulous. And thanks to everybody watching. Those are great questions. Keep them coming. But for now, we're going to head back to our tour of CropKing.
All right. Okay, so earlier, I mentioned that we grow a special type of hydroponic in a special type of way, which is called controlled environment agriculture. And we can control all of the temperature and the variables inside of our greenhouse. And the key is that we're doing it inside. And so the outside of this greenhouse is covered in a polyethylene film that's about 6 millimeters thick. And it looks like visqueen or a painter's drop cloth, but it's not. It's real specialized and very hardy. It has some special coatings on it that make growing inside this greenhouse very functional. The first type of coating is a UV coating that keeps UV light from penetrating in the greenhouse, that protects our workers and our equipment. Then it also has a anti-condensate coating that's on there. And that anti-condensate coating, well, when the plants transpire, the condensation on the sides of the greenhouse beads up the moisture and lets it roll off, so it's not raining down onto our workers and back onto the plants to spread disease. Then the last coating that it has on there is an IR treatment or infrared treatment. And as heat is dissipating off of or radiating off of the plants or the systems or the cement down below, the heat hits the material in the greenhouse and then bounces back down, and that helps regulate the temperature, keeping it cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. The other thing that we put on top of our greenhouse film is what's called aluminate, which is a shaded cloth. And it works similar to the IR treatment in that it bounces that radiant heat off of the building before it actually goes inside. So it helps keep the building a lot cooler. Then we also have a regular shade cloth. We use white shade cloth. It's a little cheaper than the aluminate. And it does the same thing. It just shades the plants so that they're not too stressed out as well. And so this picture here, you can see the aluminate on the left and then our white shade cloth on the right on the top of the greenhouse. Let's see if we can go inside.
So while we're waiting to go inside the greenhouse, we did have a question from Jared, and he wants to know, Dave, could you estimate how much water is saved when you grow a tomato plant in hydroponics versus your garden?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jared. The savings is actually 90% savings compared to field crop growing. So it's quite a bit. So when you first look at the greenhouse and you're thinking, or the systems, and you're thinking, well, that's a lot of water, 500 gallons, it's being reused. So we just top it off as the plants take it up. So it's a 90% savings. That's a huge amount of savings, especially for places like out west where water is very scarce.
That's great. Could you speak to why this may or may not be a better or more sustainable option than the current monocrop agriculture we have for the majority of our agriculture here in the States? And that's a question from YouTube.
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons. So one is because we're growing in a controlled environment, we are giving the plants basically just enough fertilizer and just enough water, so nothing is being wasted. So we're saving water, we're saving resources. Plus, these greenhouses can be located very close to, say, urban areas, cities, or the customers, so the food doesn't have to go through thousands of miles of transportation to get to market. So now we're also saving in fuel costs and in transportation as well as from growing. So it's a high concentration, high turnover combination plus less resources. And with all that, it helps make a big difference in growing collectively for the environment.
Great. I noticed that in the one video, and you mentioned the bumblebees. Why do you use that species of bee? Because there's different ones you could use, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. So generally, bees are used in agriculture for pollination. And so in fact, about a third of all the food that we eat is pollinated by bees, honeybees. In a greenhouse, we can't use honeybees because honeybees, their spatial orientation is kind of comes from where the sun's at. They use the sun to kind of figure out where to go home and where to get their food. And a bumblebee uses actually the environment around them to orient himself. And so in a greenhouse, that film diffuses the light, and then it would just disorient a honeybee, and they would just get confused on where they're at. But for a bumblebee, they know exactly where they're at and where the flowers are at, because their locations based on, they can find those locations based on where they're at spatially, physically spatially. So it's, we call it the diffusion confusion.
I love that. I did not know that. I learned something new. How exciting. Great. So we're going to go ahead and keep on moving. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about some other types of systems at CropKing.
Yeah. So aside from the NFT system, the bucket systems that we do, we also sell all of the nutrients that for our farmers that are growing, and then the equipment to help deliver that nutrient. So in the picture here, you can see our fertroller system that helps the NFT system, and then for the Dutch bucket system on the left. And so we can actually create recipes specific to your water in your area and the crops that you're growing. That's how detailed we can get with those products. And then aside from that, we also have a couple different other types of growing in the next slide, which is on the left here, is a microgreen system that can also be used for hydroponic fodder. And hydroponic fodder is just growing livestock feed hydroponically, so that you can feed goats and chickens and pigs and cows with that, basically sprouting barley. And then on the right is what's called an aquaculture system, or recirculatory aquaculture system, where we're reusing the water and filtering it for growing things like fish or maybe even shrimp, which is kind of cool. So these systems can also be are small enough to be in classrooms or school greenhouses as well. And then the last system we have is what's called aquaponics. And this is a combination of recirculatory aquaculture with hydroponic growing. That's how we get the name aqua from aquaculture, and ponics from hydroponics. And basically with this, we're growing fish in here. We feed the fish, and then the fish waste is being filtered and then by the plants. So the plants take that waste out of the water, use it to grow, and then the water comes back clean to the fish for them to swim in and be healthy. So the two plants are working with bacteria in a symbiotic relationship. And again, these are small systems that can be in classrooms as well, or greenhouses.
That's great. And I am a former middle school teacher, and we had an aquaponics system, and it was really wonderful for my students. Also, Jim will probably touch on this in a little bit, but in one of our past expeditions, we visited a different aquaponics farm, and the teachers actually created an Aquaponics 101 guide that you can find on our website. So Dave, before we hand it over to Jim, Pam has a question, and she would like to know, how much would it cost to start up a system?
Oh, great. That's a good question. So if you're looking for a small hobby system, just a few $100s can get you going. You basically would get the system itself, depending on the size you want, and then you'd need lights if you're not going to be in a greenhouse or where there isn't any natural lighting. And then the nutrients, which is pretty cheap as well. So just for a few $100, you can get yourself into growing these systems. The larger systems are going to cost a little bit more than that, though. Quite a bit more.
Great. And everybody, keep those questions coming. They're great. Thank you so much, Dave. We're going to come back to you. But right now, we're going to switch it over to Jim. And he's going to tell us a little bit about how hydroponics can help us save our future.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm unmuted.
You're good, Jim. We hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. So we started with CropKing a couple of years ago. Actually, if you look on YouTube with Paul Brentlinger and I, we did a little homemade aquaponic unit that turned out fantastic. And from that, and I always say, start small, and then the ideas keep coming. There's grant money out there for all of this. And we have a fantastic system at Coventry Middle School, a controlled environment agricultural system right now. look at this, just picked this morning. And so we'll look at that a little bit later. But Jacqueline said, and we had some great questions this morning, and I thought I knew it all. And then I realized how little I knew today just by listening to Dave. So thank you, Dave, very much for that education on hydroponics and growing. Our kids had a fantastic time with our greenhouse this year, and it was so successful. I think one of the things that really opened up our eyes, and especially with the students, was that when they heard the fact that there were 124 million people in 2019 who faced food insecurity. And that's just unbelievable. And so their first thought is hydroponics a way that we could maybe fix this? And it certainly is. So, we have to start thinking like this, because I told my kids in middle school who are 12 years old, I said, when you guys get in your 40s, there's probably going to be about 10 billion people on this planet. And how are we going to feed 10 billion people? We're not making more farmland anywhere. And so we have to start thinking along these lines with hydroponics or alternative methods of growing. So, but some of the things that Jacqueline had mentioned that talk about was saving the planet, and David touched on this as well, is that we're growing it so close to the point of sale. So, if we grew this morning, we could have this in someone's dinner. Someone could be eating this evening for dinner. And so, you don't lose that transportation. In the middle of winter, when we had looking at the snow flying outside, we were growing this beautiful lettuce and tomatoes and cucumbers and having salads. And we weren't waiting for 2 weeks for something to come from another state that had a better climate for us to get that food. So you can imagine the taste is incredible. It's so fresh and reasonably priced. So that's huge too. And we're not using any kind of fossil fuels to transport any of these materials to another state. Also, when we think about climate change and the reality of climate change, with the droughts and the flooding and the temperature extremes, we can grow food like this anywhere at any time of the year. And it's protected because it's a controlled environment agriculture system, which means it's in a closed system. So ours was just in an old classroom that wasn't being used, an old chemistry classroom that was about 30 feet by 30 feet. And so we grow, it's about 1/5 of the space to grow the same amount of vegetables. So 1/5 of the space that you would use in regular agriculture, like planting a garden. And Dave mentioned something about the size of the football fields and what they grow in the greenhouse there. So you use 1/5 of the space to grow the exact same amount of vegetables with that. So much less water. The water's recycled. You save about 90% in water. I think someone said that about 12 to 15 gallons of water to grow 1 head of lettuce, and where we can do it with 1 gallon of water. So it's pretty remarkable, really. And I think this is going to catch on in schools very quickly. And especially if people have questions or would like to know more about our system, we are very lucky to have CropKing practically in our backyard, but they're just a phone call away, and they're more than willing to help out with that. Also, Jacqueline mentioned.
Sorry, go ahead, Jim. Well, we just had a question. So you're talking about, having these in classrooms and in schools. Chris would like to know, what is the most challenging part of running a greenhouse or hydroponics at your school? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there are challenges, for sure. But it's all fun challenges, and the kids just figure it out. And kids just come up with these remarkable ideas that I never would have had to fix something. And so that's what's cool. But the biggest challenge is you have to be in a greenhouse every single day. And you have to make sure everything's running smoothly. You check for, any problems with the plants. Maybe there's a little leak somewhere. You have to check on those things. So every single day that had to be monitored. So we would have a group of greenhouse kids who would come in and check everything out. And a greenhouse should be immaculately cleaned. and ours was. And so, yeah, that's the challenge, is making sure you have the time every day to spend there. I would say I spent probably a solid hour a day in the greenhouse.
I think that's fair. And when I had an aquaponics system at my former school, you know, the fish don't know that you're on break, on spring break, right? So you have to go in and feed them and take care of the plants. So I would say that that is definitely a challenge, but something that, you know, is easy to work around.
Yeah.
So Jim, can you tell us a little bit about how greenhouses can not only provide food, but I know that you and your students have worked to help local environments with your greenhouse. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I'll show some pictures while you're talking.
Yeah, we're just now starting to work with growing some endemic species in our bog behind our school, and a couple nature preserves in the surrounding schools. So in our nursery here at the school, and I think you're seeing these pictures right now, we are growing some wetland plants, carnivorous plants actually, through tissue culture and through seed. And you can see there's some pitcher plants there. Very successful. We even had one bloom, which is unusual to see. So we're going to continue with that as well, to try to get these into our wetland bog area. And there's some of the students testing some of the water down in the bog. Early spring, we were out there doing some water testing. And this is a unit that was I helped a friend with in her basement. And she's having phenomenal success with it. And like Paul said, I think we spent less than $50 on this setup with just some PVC pipe. And a lot of times people have some PVC pipe lying around that they say, oh yeah, take that off my hands. It's just junk here in the garage. And just a little tote with some water in it and a pump. And look what she did there. So she's ready to go with salads.
That's incredible. And I love that you and your students are finding another way to use hydroponics and aquaponics as well. So you can have a snack.
Jacqueline, I wish everyone could come over for a big salad tonight, because seriously, it is just like summer, just like
so
picking
good.
it right off the vine.
I love that. Yep. Thank you, Jim. That's fabulous. Yep. So I'm actually gonna have this question for both you and Dave. I'll let you answer it first, Jim, and then we'll go to Dave. And that is, how did you get into hydroponics, and what was the inspiration?
Well, that's funny you should ask, Jacqueline. Because and I want to really plug our Aquaponics 101 as well on earthecho.org, because it's a phenomenal resource for educators to get started in hydroponics and aquaponics, and just using very, very simple technique and materials that you might have around the house. But I was lucky enough to be on expedition in Southern California called Water by Design with Earth Echo and Jacqueline and Philippe Cousteau. And we had gone to, I believe, Future Farms. And Chef Adam was incredible. And I looked around and I thought, oh my gosh, we could do this. And he had his own restaurant where he was serving what he was growing, phenomenal food. So we came back and we did it.
That's great. I love that story. And yes, it was Future Foods Farms. And if you are interested, you can check out Expedition Water by Design. We'll show you actually, thank you. We're going to show you that right now. So if you head to earthecho.org, you'll head to Expeditions. And Jim was on our Expedition Water by Design, which is in Southern California. And not only do we have a video all about aquaponics, but we also have a video looking at Chef Adam and his career. So it's what we call a STEM career close-up. And you can also find that teacher resource there. So thank you so much. So Dave, same question for you. How did you get into hydroponics, and what was your inspiration?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short story is I have a farm. I'm actually broadcasting here from my farm in Iowa, where we grew tomatoes and basil for restaurants and grocery stores. But we wanted to diversify the product that we had, and we couldn't do lettuce production on the space that we had. So we actually introduced hydroponic lettuce first. And then from there, I actually started working in a commercial aquaponics greenhouse. And then I've kind of done greenhouse sales and hydroponic sales for the last 8 years now. So, I've been doing it for quite a while.
That's great. So we have a question from Izzy coming from YouTube, and she would like to know, are hydroponics good for all types of plants? She is growing an herb container garden, and she's not sure if a hydroponic system, if she created one, if that would work for those herbs.
Yeah. So, and hydroponic is kind of fun for lots of different plants. You don't have to just do the tomatoes and the cucumbers and lettuce that you saw in our greenhouses. In fact, we have growing right now, we have lots of different herbs like dill and basil, cilantro growing. We even have some lemongrass. We do flowers as well. So we can grow tons of different types of plants. It doesn't have to be just your regular produce. And then hydroponics is actually just fun to play with and have fun with as well. I've seen people actually grow carrots in NFT channels. I've grown strawberries in the NFT channels. So there's a lot of variety of what you can do in there. In the commercial greenhouses, it just kind of matters how much room and how much money the grocery stores will pay for your crop and what you can sell. So some things like, growing zucchini takes up a lot of space, but you're not going to get a lot of money for. So you wouldn't really do that commercially, but it would be a lot of fun to do it for fun at home.
That's great. And so we have a question from Chris, and it's kind of along the same lines. Are there suggestions for the best seeds to use for hydroponics? Does it matter what brand, the variety, how much you spend on the seeds?
Good question. So in a commercial greenhouse, genetics is everything. So you want to have good seeds to make the money that you want to make. And a hobby level, anything can work. You can grow with any type of seed, any type of tomato or lettuce that you find that you have available. I've even done heirloom tomatoes in my hydroponics, and although they don't like it very much, they still produce some fruit, and it makes it a lot of fun too. So you can do purple tomatoes, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too. I had just gotten some zinnia seeds from a dollar store, and they were like 10 cents a pack, and they were the most beautiful flowers this winter. It was incredible. They were like 4 feet tall, and it was unbelievable. People walked in, they thought it was like Dorothy opening the door into the land of Oz. Yeah, so it's very cool.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
and it's nice that hydroponics is really for everybody. There's something for everybody, small scale, big scale, different species. That's different varieties. I love that. Yep. So while we are, I think it's time for a little pop quiz for those watching. What do you think, Dave?
Sure.
All right. So Dave, if you want to ask the questions of our audience in Zoom and YouTube, you guys could go ahead and type in your answers and we'll see who gets them right.
All right. So the first question is, we'll see if you were listening. What percentage of water is saved when you grow hydroponically? Give you a few, do Jeopardy.
See some responses coming in here. Jared says 90%.
Ooh, way to go, Jared. Big thumbs up there.
Good job, Jared.
Shout out.
All right, here's a hard one. All right, what does NFT stand for? So
and while we're letting people noodle on that one, I just want to say that Karen got 90% on the percentage of water saved too. So good job, Karen.
All right.
All right, NFT. Nutrient film technique?
That's right.
Wow. And that was Karen. Good job.
Karen, way to go.
Oops, one more.
Very good listener. Okay. Now this is a tough one because the video got caught up, so we didn't get to go through this so you could see it, but maybe someone out there knows the answer. So do greenhouse exhaust fans blow cool air in or the hot air out? So think about if it's an exhaust fan, what it's doing. Little tip.
So we have Jared with a guess, and he thinks that hot air blows out.
That's right. Way to go, Jared. You're
Nice.
a smarty. Yeah.
Good job. And also Trisha got that right, and Izzy as well. So good job, everybody.
Awesome. You guys are great. Yeah, so we blow the hot air out and we bring in cool, dry air in. So that's why we do that.
All right, so we'll do one last call for questions. And how many tomatoes do you typically get off one plant, Dave?
Ooh, we can get 50 pounds of tomatoes off of a plant. So every month we can get about 50 pounds. That's right. So that's like 3 pounds or so of lettuce or of tomatoes every time we harvest. So it's a lot. That's a lot of tomatoes.
A lot of tomatoes. All right. So as we go to wrap up, I know that you wanted to, oh, sorry, we have one more question. And that is, depending on the species, how long does it take plants to grow?
Oh, good questions. So our lettuce, as we said, we can grow that in about less than 30 days or so. So a few weeks in the nursery channel, 2 to 3 weeks in the nursery channel, and about 4 weeks to grow out. If you're growing, your tomatoes, then it basically just takes a few weeks to get started when you get the transplant in the system to start fruiting. So it's much quicker inside the greenhouse than outside because we're giving it all the light that it needs and all the heat that it needs to grow and nutrients it needs to grow fast. So outside, it's going to have to compete with weather changes, cooler weather potentially, pests, maybe not enough nutrients to grow as fast. So it's going to be a little bit slower compared to inside. So, sometimes I feel like I can watch the lettuce grow while I'm just working in the greenhouse. It grows that fast.
And Dave, you mentioned 50 pounds of tomatoes from one plant. How long would that take?
Oh, about a month. So
Okay.
each one of those buckets, we can harvest, 50 to maybe 60 pounds. Some cultivars, some varieties of tomatoes, you could get up to 70 pounds off of a plant. So it's a lot of weight. So when we're trellising plants, lots of plants at a time with a lot of weight at a time. So it's lots of juicy tomatoes come off those plants.
It's a lot of tomatoes. All right. So thank you everyone for those great questions. Dave, did you want to share some of CropKing's social information with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a website, www.cropking.com, where you can go and see all of the systems that we have available. So if you want a better look at some of those and different pictures of the different systems we have, you can get engaged with us on Facebook. We always posting stuff on there, all sorts of neat stuff there. If you'd like, you can follow me on CropKing Schools, where we talk a lot about the school systems and the things that you can do in classrooms with hydroponics. Or you can give me questions there, or if you have other questions, you can get a hold of me on my email address as well. So happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you, Jim, for joining us today. What a great virtual field trip.
Thank you.
We also want to give a special shout out to the Northrop Grumman Foundation, who generously funds our expedition programs and some of our other programs with Earth Echo as well. Again, you can follow along with Earth Echo's adventures at earthecho.org. We also have Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and I did get a question that is this recording or is this virtual field trip going to be available? And yes, it will be available on our YouTube channel just a little bit later today, so you can come back and reference it. Again, Dave and Jim, thank you so much for your time today and sharing all this wonderful information. I think we're going to have a lot of people out there starting hydroponics at their home, which is so lovely. So from all of us at Earth Echo International, thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe and keep exploring, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.